What led you to identify these things specifically?
I've mentored product managers in the past, and they were doing exactly what their job description said. They were writing perfect PRDs, they were doing pricing analysis, they were doing everything, great Jira tickets, and they didn't feel like they were advancing fast enough. There's like nonverbal clues, and a lot of times what you're thinking comes across even in your body language. Don't overdo it. Don't get so empathetic that you halt all confrontations, because we do need to drive things forward.
Welcome to the Product Development Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Wakeling, and in this episode, I'm joined by Amy Mitchell. Amy is Principal Product Manager at Dell for their Managed Services and Cloud Product Management, and she's also author of the Product Management IRL substack. In this episode, we talk about the 7 superpowers of great product managers and some of the tactics around developing these skills. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any other platform you use, please make sure to leave a review and a rating. It really helps grow the podcast into the future, as does subscribing to us on YouTube, where you just need to search for the Product Development Podcast and click through to the channel. But without further ado, here's the episode with Amy Mitchell on the 7 superpowers of great product managers. Amy, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, before we had this call, I read one of your newsletters, which was, I think, good to great, the 7 superpowers of product management, and what separates good and great product managers. So I'm looking forward to diving into the different areas you identified in that newsletter. But for everyone's benefit, if I outline the 7 superpowers you mentioned, and then we can kind of go into each one in a bit more detail and unpack them a bit more.
That sounds good, Adam. Yeah, I wrote it when I observed that these aren't really stated in job descriptions for product managers, but our bosses look for it. So
Mm.
I thought it might help to talk about some of them.
So the first one is empathy, then communication skills, resilience, discernment, prioritizing by value, patience, and then blending these skills together as the kind of the secret sauce of the 7th, I guess, superpower. So before we go into each one of these, what led you to identify these things specifically?
I've mentored product managers in the past, and they were doing exactly what their job description said. They were writing perfect PRDs. They were doing pricing analysis. They were doing everything, great Jira tickets, and they didn't feel like they were advancing fast enough.
Mm.
So it got me thinking about, well, what are those different things that kind of are like icing on the cake for a product manager? And you never see this in job descriptions. I've never seen a job description that says like empathy, resilience.
It's true.
And some
Mm.
of these are the extra things you do, like building relationships, communicating well, not giving up. And so I synthesized them into several ideas. And the funny thing is, when I wrote it first, I only had 3. And then people came back on LinkedIn and they said, "Oh, you forgot about this." So
Right.
I added them, and it was a great way to talk to the product management community and get different people's opinions.
Mm. It's very much a collaborative approach to identifying these 7 superpowers then. Awesome.
Yes.
So I mean, on the empathy then, the very first one, I think empathy, there are different types of empathy, right? There's, I suppose, cognitive, and like somatic, where you literally feel, what the other person is feeling. So in terms of what you identified as empathy, what is that to you? Or what is empathy in the confines of this product management superpower?
Yeah, it's being able to change your perspective. And like some people say, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And it's projecting yourself into their perspective. And it does help a lot, to kind of think of things from somebody else's perspective, like your stakeholders. You put yourself in their mindset, and of course,
Mm.
they're all worried about the money. Usually, in my opinion, like what will they get if they invest in some new engineering project? And with coworkers is the one that I think about a lot. Like, did I say something that made them mad? Or do I feel myself getting angry? To
Mm,
When you look at it from their perspective, sometimes it'll give you some clues. And the final one is on customers, which, while you might do one thing with internal people, with customers, you kind of do have to really think about what are they trying to get done. And the more you talk to customers, the more you can understand it and represent them to your engineering team. Because oftentimes the product manager's the only one that can really represent the customer, because you know how things are going to come out, and
sure.
you can also project what the customer might think about that. So a lot of it is about being able to change your perspective.
So
It helps you on the empathy.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I think traditionally you think product management empathy is very much that customer user empathy, and probably people think less about the internal um, empathy between, let's say, product and marketing, product and sales, the different perspectives and understanding their perspectives and making sure that you're accommodating that, I suppose, in communications or articulating certain points. So, can you speak to some of that then in terms of building empathy and not misinterpreting potentially what other people are thinking?
And sometimes it happens.
Mm,
You do misinterpret, and sometimes I feel my anger rising. Right, somebody says something, or you're presenting to a stakeholder, and they interrupt you, and they have an issue. It sounds like they are attacking you almost. Sometimes that happens to all of us. I've learned to check my anger, because sometimes you don't realize it. All of us, we get excited and passionate, and we we might say something that doesn't sound right. But I know, for like on stakeholders, they they need to get to the point. They have so many things they're worrying about. So I try to stay calm, stick to the facts, even come back and take an action item if I really feel like either I don't have the facts, or I feel myself getting emotional.
do you think that you mentioned emotion there? Do you think there's a place for emotion in that kind of stakeholder meeting environment, or is it actually, do you think, detrimental to the outcomes to bring too much emotion into that environment?
Well, I think it is helpful to show some passion a lot of times. Also, if you suppress your emotions, you also can come across as low energy, and you want to meet your audience where they are. So emotions to a point, I think, are good. It There's like nonverbal clues, and a lot of times what you're thinking comes across even in your body language. So
Mm,
I feel like you can be emotional, but on the anger side, you really need to watch yourself, because you need long-term relationships to get product done. You have to have ongoing long-term relationships with people, and if you get upset or show your anger, it makes it hard. And sometimes you're angry in the moment, and it might be because you don't have all the information you need, and things blow over, but people remember the anger, unfortunately.
mm. So I think, yes, self awareness and having control of your emotions and knowing when to toggle certain things, when to switch it off, maybe to hold back and let your ego move to the side a little bit and maybe compromise somewhere. Maybe I don't.
That's a
um,
good way to say it, you
mm.
know?
I mean, any sort of practical tips, let's say you have quite a challenging relationship with another stakeholder in the business. Let's say you're not seeing things in the same way. There's that point of tension. And what do you think are some good tactics to try and bridge those gaps?
Yeah, there's a couple tactics I've used. One is to find common ground. And even on the biggest disconnect, there's got to be some common ground. Uh, you're probably working at the same company, or you're working with a customer who's got to use your product, or a competing product. So you can find the common ground, like, hey, we're all stakeholders here. or hey, we all work for John Smith, the CEO. And the other thing is to bring some humor into it. Like, hey, in 6 months when we release this, we're going to be celebrating. And that a lot of times calms things
Mm.
down, because when you think about the longer view, usually you have something in common down the road. And it also helps remind people that, hey, we really are on the same side. We're not out to do this. And another thing is, people don't wake up and no one wakes up and says, "Oh, hey, let's make Adam have a bad day. So let's go get after him or deny what he wants."
Mm.
People are after their own objectives, and sometimes they don't always meet. So that's my main thing I do is try
Yeah.
to get to common ground.
Yeah, and that obviously a big part of that common ground is effective communication, which kind of lends it quite nicely into that second superpower on communication skills. So the concept of communication is extremely broad, and there are many different ways to think about it. There are many different ways to communicate, whether it's spoken, whether it's written, visual, whatever else it might be. So, yeah, what are you thinking about in terms of communication for product management specifically?
Yeah, the first thing is know your audience. So sometimes that means preparation. Even if you've got a big executive presentation, what I do is I'll ask colleagues, "Hey, I know you did a presentation to John Big Guy a month ago. What should I know?" And by having relationships, you have people that will want to help you, or that you're not too shy to ask them a question either. So a lot of times you can find a prior presentation, or someone will say, "Hey, that triggers him or her. Don't
Mm.
do that." Um, Another reason why you have to know your audience is, in product management, a lot of times we have to repeat our message a lot, because there's a diverse team of people that need to work with you. And for me, I get bored repeating. If it's all about, hey, feature X is gonna grow our revenue, and you need to say it to a bunch of different people,
Hmm.
it makes it a lot more interesting if I think, well, how do I meet my audience? What do they want to know about this? And then suddenly I'm looking at a new message, and it's less repetition. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, whether you're doing verbal, written, is to have a story. People love stories, and they can remember a lot better. I also can remember a lot better when I have a story. And by a story, this isn't like a great writer's journey thing. This is, you have a situation, you have some kind of conflict, some kind of
Hmm.
problem, you cover the resolution, and then next steps. And I found I'll be working and working away on a presentation, and I need to take a step back, put it in slide sorter view, and what's my story, and what's the problem, and then what are we going to do about it? So know where you want to go, but also communicate it to people as
Mm.
well.
Yeah, it reminds me of the STAR kind of framework, which is very common in job interviews. And if you're doing sort of particularly product interviews, I think I read a book a while ago called "Cracking the PM Interview," which is a very popular product management, career advancement, and getting a job in product book. One of the big parts of that is use the STAR framework, which is that situation, I believe, task, then action and result. So keeping things like that, it has a very nice flow, and it's not the most incredible story you may ever hear, but if you craft it in a very structured way, I suppose that's a big part of storytelling. There's a structure to it. Um, I mean, anything in terms of telling a good story that you can kind of share in your experience, beyond those kind of top level structural pieces.
Yeah. And another piece that a lot of us, especially in product and in engineering, is we don't want to feel like a slimy, icky salesperson, but we do need to persuade people. People have trouble sometimes understanding your point, and sometimes good old persuasion helps out. And by persuasion, I mean have a compelling message that people want to listen to you. Um, and the other thing is really know what you want. I went to a presentation when I was trying to get ready for one of my executive ones. I got to sit in on one, and the product manager presented his story very well, lots of detail, and it was about we needed to invest in some new tool. And he got to the end, and the executive says, "What do you want from me? It looks like you got it all down." And it, he had forgotten to ask at the end, "Can you approve this so I can go get the budget request in and I get the team organized?"
Mm,
And that's part of persuasion is you get sometimes so wrapped up in getting your facts and getting your story out there, you forget what it is you want. And on this case, the product manager, he really wanted approval. He needed that approval to go have the authority to get the budget and build the team. And he had gotten wrapped up into the story.
mm.
So that's part of the persuasion is knowing what you want, making it compelling enough so that you can get what you want.
The plot needs an ending with a a big moment at the end to kind of bring it all together, which sounded like that was a kind of missing piece there.
Yeah, and some of that comes back to knowing your who's the executive or who's your audience, because the executive heard a great story, but he wasn't sure why do I need to hear this story? So a lot of times, knowing your objective really helps on
Mm.
getting that communication point across.
Yeah, I guess it helps shape the narrative as well. If you have the end point, you know, the end state where you need to get to, all the points therefore should be leading towards that end moment, and yeah, really focusing on that. But I mean, outside of the executive side, do you think that is just as important, you know, across the business in terms of other departments, not necessarily having to convince people, but do you think just generally speaking, in this more story-like structure, when you're trying to communicate ideas or talking about even product updates and that sort of thing, is it useful to go into that storytelling functionality?
Yes, and you don't have to like smack somebody in the face with it. With executives, they kind of need it to be very clear. But
Mm,
you're right. When you work with other teams, they typically do want to know the why. Like you call up marketing. Hey, I think it's time to launch this new release. What do you have underway? They might say it, they might only be thinking it, like, "Why are you asking me about this?" Because everyone's busy. And of course, we all want to help each other, but knowing the why is so important. And eh, sometimes even just your role helps establish the why. Like when I call up marketing, they kind of know what product managers are after. It's usually about some outbound message thing. But even then they want to know the why.
mm,
Like maybe this is a complex feature. I just had a demo from engineering. I think I could help you with the content, or here's the demo, here's what's important. The story doesn't necessarily come out, but if you have it in your mind, a lot of times you can get the result you're trying to get.
so, moving on to the next superpower, resilience. Yeah, resilience. What are you thinking about when it comes to that?
This one is really around persistence. And where I first learned this when I first started out getting out of school, I was in engineering, and we had a big bug. It was one of those phantom bugs, and customers were getting irate. It was causing outages. And we had done all the obvious things, like recheck the code, tried to recreate it. Nothing was working. And we finally decided, let's do a debug patch, just something to change the situation. And with the debug patch, we got a couple clues, which led to a few more clues. Eventually, we got the bug fixed. And even though it's an engineering story, it applies to product management because we get irate customers, and engineering has done everything they can or they think, and you have to find something different. So one technique that a lot of people accuse me of doing is, oh, spaghetti on the wall. Just start getting some ideas, outlandish ideas, anything to change it up.
Mm,
And for me, that's persistence.
mm.
When things, you've tried all the obvious things, it looks impossible, find some little change and it'll get you clues. It won't get you the answer, but change.
I mean, other forms of resilience. Are you also thinking about, when times get tough, I suppose, and how resilient you can be, because product management can be quite demanding. And how
Right.
do you think about resilience in times where maybe deadlines are tight, budgets are difficult, you have high demand, you have angry customers? How do you cope with all that?
Yeah, and you probably have several initiatives underway and they're all competing for your attention. So besides changing things up, another thing I like to remind myself is work on what I can control. So you might have an irate customer, and if engineering's doing all they can, they're keeping you updated, there's not much more you can do. You need to
Hmm.
let subject matter experts do their thing. Another example is like, and this irritates product managers a lot. You get attached maybe to one architect. You're always working with this architect, bouncing ideas off. You're just like yin and yang. You're getting stuff done. And for whatever reason, that great architect gets assigned somewhere else. And you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to be as effective as I have been? And you're going to be tempted to go to that boss and say, you got to get him back. This is devastating to the product. That that's not a good thing to ask though, because there's things that are way outside of your control. There might have been something higher priority. It could be
Hmm.
personal. You don't know. So you can't ask for a particular person. What you can ask for though is, hey, I need someone that's in my time zone because we have to work together a lot. Or I need someone with this background because it complements my background. So the main part of resilience is sticking in your lane, but also respecting other people's lane and working with them in a respectful manner. Don't tell them what to do. And and I find it, when I'm spun up about whatever stressful thing, um, is first look at what can I control and have I done what I can there. And outside of my lane, I'm going to let it go.
Mm.
Once I have my requirements out, then let other people do their thing.
It ties quite nicely with empathy, right? As well. Yeah. The next point then, discernment. Um, how to handle trade offs, that sort of thing. What are you thinking on discernment side?
Yeah, this relates a lot to good judgment. And as I've been working for a while, I I start looking, I see patterns that also help me make decisions. Sometimes I just go with my gut too, because when you have relationships with people, you understand where they're coming from. A lot of times you can go with your gut, but the patterns and reflecting on the patterns I see have helped the most. Like forecasting is a good example. In product management, a lot of times we have to say, what's going to happen if several steps down the road, if you get this investment, you get the engineering team on your requirement, what's going to happen? What's the business outcome? And so you write it down. The key part is reflecting on it. And like some of the first mistakes I made on forecasting is like expecting revenue to hit on the day we release, which is kind of funny when you think about it now. But when you want to get that investment and you want to get people working and get them excited,
Hmm.
you want to see that you think the revenue is going to come first. And you learn over time, especially as you work on a product for a while, a year or two, you start figuring out, well, the sales cycle on this particular product is 1 week, whereas my last product, it was a year. So patterns is helpful if you write it down and you reflect.
I think it's also easy to your point there, creating an expectation of something which is unrealistic. And I think managing realistic metrics, let's say, you have your success metrics, which you're assigning to a feature update or whatever else it could be. And you're using that as leverage maybe to try and convince leadership or stakeholders to do that thing. I assume you can have discernment in that, but you need the good judgment on what is the correct numbers to use. Not to overestimate the impact that it could potentially make, because I guess in the long run, that's going to be less effective for yourself and the business.
Right. And and also about writing it down. And a number of people, this was one of the ones when I first wrote the article, people came back and said, you really need to put in good judgment and discernment. And going with that, several people sent me templates of a decision log. And in the heat of it, when you're making decisions, a lot of times you don't want to write it down. You're like, it's just a decision, no big deal. And what happens is we forget. And I was on, this is just recently, I was in an urgent product initiative. The executives wanted it out this quarter. And we hit a fork in the road. Which SKU should we use? Which SKU will uh, be the easiest to implement? And went around, talked to everyone, laid out the two options, and we decided to use the type of SKU we've always been using, not a new one, new type. And it did cause some delays, and the team was ready to move on. Okay, well, we lost a couple weeks on this project. We're just going to use the same SKUs, no big deal. I decided to write it down. And I was so glad I did, because while we made up time, we still got the product initiative out. Late in it, somebody said, well, why didn't you do the other type of SKU? That seems dumb. I was glad I'd written it down
Mm.
because I said, well, here's what we looked at. Here's the facts we had that made that decision. And this is why we're where we are.
So the decision log that you mentioned there, is there a structure to it, or is it literally just writing down, we made this decision on this day because X, Y, Z, and that's what you need to do? Or is there quite a good format so that later on you can come back and see this map of all those pivotal moments where you made decisions which are useful to historically refer to?
Yeah, it's usually a row like what was the decision, a couple of factors. You might note a trigger that could make you have to reopen it, and then just write down, we decided to go forward with this because that aligned best with our schedule needs.
Gotcha.
Um, Now, leading up to that, you also want to write it down, but that's very free form, where you
Mm,
say, I looked at this option, I looked at that option, and there's facts behind it, and here's why.
mm.
Those are always different, but then usually for the program as a whole, you'll note down those key decisions just in a row so you can go back and look at it and say, like on my case, oh yeah, that was the SKU decision. I could go back and look at the detailed work on the SKU where we
Yeah.
checked with everybody.
I
Yeah.
can definitely put my hands up and say that a number of times in the last probably couple of years, I've put my hand up and said, yeah, we did that thing there, but I can't actually remember why we did that specific decision back then. And really struggling to, think about why we did that. And even other people in the company thinking, oh, yeah, I remember that conversation as well, but I can't quite remember the reason why we did it. And obviously, that's really important information and intel that can drive future decisions and help you make sure that you're doing things in a consistent or right way. So yeah, I think that's definitely something a very good practical thing for people to think about. On the next point, then, prioritization of by value. Now, there are many prioritization frameworks out there, but what do you think? Are you thinking about frameworks? Is it nothing to do with frameworks? What are your thoughts?
I know a lot of people rely on these prioritization frameworks. They've never helped me, Adam. um, I think it's the frameworks give you a nice way to think about things, but what I mean by prioritize by value is two things. One, on your time, put a value on your time. We all talk a big talk about work life balance, but I find that I need time to think. And if I'm just jumping from one thing to another, I'm not doing the best value I can as a product manager.
Right,
So by time value, what I'm talking about is one, you need to know the organization goals because we product managers, we're so key to the success of the organization because we're bringing together engineering resources and investment and getting something that can be sold. So you have to build within your organization's goals. So you can't, if your organization is always doing 90% margin because you're software, you can't come popping in and say, hey, I want to do a 5% commodity type of product here. So you align within your goals. And then I take that down into every requirement I write. I need to know what's the value of it. And I have a story on that too, on the requirements. I frequently have had engineering say, we're in a requirements review. Hey, we need to refactor the UX. We've got a lot of tech debt on
right.
that. You need to put a requirement in to refactor the UX because I'm not going to get to it unless you tell me to. Well, if if I haven't had customer complaints about the UX or some other customer driver or some reason, if I know a customer is going to spend more money because we refactor the back end of the UX, I'll put it in. But typically I'll say, I'm not going to put that in. You're welcome to factor it into your plan because you know the technology better than me. You know what you need to optimize the UX back end. But I'm sorry, I can't put it in because I can't tie a value to it.
Yeah, that's the kind of unique role of the product, right? It's the being able to be empathetic to all the different divisions in the company, to be empathetic with the customers, use and tie all that together to really create an understanding of what the priorities should be in which order. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of product people have that interaction with engineering, saying we have to do this. This is the most important thing. From a technical perspective, we have to do this before everything else. But it may be important, but is it more important than that sales request that has come in that's going to retain that customer and for the next 12 months and have a significant revenue boost as a result? It's yeah. How do you approach making sure that you're doing the right things that's solving the problems that you should be focusing on?
Yeah, that's another
It's a big question, I
tricky
know,
one.
but
Yeah, it's a big question, and I have a couple of things there because you do have to understand the problem to bring solutions to it. And the first thing is, even though you might be the most technical product guy in the world, you still need to understand your product's financial health. Who are the big customers? Where's your revenue coming from? What are your big costs? what's your growth? And as we know, products kind of take this maturity curve. And at first, you're going to grow like a rocket ship, perhaps. You might have a slow takeoff, and maybe on a mature one, you're actually trying to manage demand down on a mature one because maybe your parts are starting to run out. So knowing the growth and helping with managing that demand is the first thing. Understand your financials. And there's a lot of things you can do to suss that out, such as making friends with your financial controller, your finance team. They'll give you some insights. Also, looking at competitors. Our competitors, what's their growth trajectory, and where are they getting their money from? So that's one step.
Mm.
Another one is don't get so internally focused. Like, oh, the controller's down on me, engineering's down on me. You need to know what's going on the outside. Sometimes there's things that have consequences that only that you as a product manager thinks about. Like maybe there was a new regulatory change, or when GDPR came out in Europe, that got product managers thinking quite a bit more
Mm.
about data privacy and security than they ever had before. And you can you need to connect the dots by looking outside, as, and don't let yourself get so wrapped up in internal politics.
Mm. Yeah, I guess if you're a natural people pleaser and wanting to have a recognition from others a lot, it can be a challenge that as well, I guess. Not
Well, you
always
can,
being liked due to certain decisions you have to take.
yeah, but if you bring something in from the outside, it's not like a personal attack.
Mm.
If your boss is saying, "Got to get sales up," and then you notice that your three top competitors are also struggling, and the reason is there's a new regulatory requirement that you is harming your sales. That's a lot better coming across than, hey, you don't know what's going on and you don't know how hard it is. It's better to let the facts speak for you,
Yeah.
or even let data speak for you. Show there's a trend and here's why there's a trend, perhaps. That's a lot less confrontational than looking at facts and problems together.
I think most people are probably not making those decisions based off purely ego. So I think, as long as you've got the why with facts, with data, as you said, that makes all these difficult conversations, decisions a lot easier to facilitate and iron out with some other stakeholders.
Yeah, and follow the value. It's about talking about the value together. You can talk together, and you can even be passionate on it, but it's not going to get personal. And your product might be over that maturity curve. It might be time to start managing demand off so that you can go get something new out there.
Well, with the data side you mentioned, how can you effectively use data to really showcase this value? Because data doesn't always just show value. It's not always a monetary number that you can share. So what are you thinking about in terms of effective communication of value in using data?
Yeah, and you're right. It isn't always directly tied to revenue. There's cost sides as well. I was on a product a few years ago, and the customers were complaining about the install was breaking on them. And so they called in support. Support fixed them every time. And unfortunately, we couldn't recreate it either. We were kind of at a stalemate. So um, besides always trying to change something, another thing I went and did is I went and looked at how many cases had we had? How long did it usually take to resolve? What was the customer satisfaction impact? Those are things that are quite helpful for justifying things that don't really generate revenue, but overall, it can have a long term effect.
Mm,
So if your support costs are going up, that's going to hurt the organization or certainly hurt your margin. And customer satisfaction, and so many of us are doing as a service products that customer satisfaction can lead to less renewals,
mm,
which will lead to a shrinking business. So there's still, even if it's not like, well, we're going to miss $1 million sale, it's about looking at costs as well and growth.
mm. So moving on to the sixth, the seventh, patience. I'd like to think I'm a quite patient person. I'm trying to think how this directly relates to being a great product manager, opposed to a good one. So what is patience in product management to you?
It's keeping the long-term view
Right.
in mind, and we have to do short-term and urgent things that, um, may or may not affect the long term, but if you have it in mind and you decide, "I'm gonna take the short-term thing and we'll pay for it later." Like, I've seen when you have a customer issue and you give the customer a temporary patch, and instead of like holistically fixing it. And you can make that decision. We do it all the time. But what you have to say to yourself is, I got to think of my future self. And it's that patch is not done until we get it merged into the main line.
Mm,
So um, that's what I mean by it. Think of your future self sometime. And that's at the product level. But I want to talk also at a personal level, because where it hits us product managers a lot is, I'm not getting promoted fast enough, or I'm ambitious and I'm just not getting where I want to go. This hits us all, right? You see somebody get promoted, you want it too. And what I've found, of course, you have to try to control those emotions, but find ways to operate at the next level. That,
mm,
and that's part of this superpower is, what should you do at the next level? What a great opportunity to practice being at the next level before you're on the stage at that level. And there's some things I like to do, and it makes it challenging, but it also makes you so much better at the level you're at. Like volunteering to talk about your product to somebody. Think about, how would you manage your time at the next level? And because when you first start out, you pretty much have to execute, just deliver. But if you thought about, well, what if I was a senior product manager instead of a, an associate product manager, maybe? And then you'd have to start thinking about some strategy at the next level. Some of these things where we talked about the value. When you first start out, you don't you haven't been exposed enough, so you don't know the value.
mm.
But as a thought exercise, it gets you ready for that next level. And one other key thing where we talk about relationships. So at your level, of course, you got a great relationship with the engineering person at your same level. But what if you suddenly were promoted? What if you kept asking for that promotion, you finally got it, and you don't even have a relationship with the head of engineering? So you can build that relationship as a more junior person, and then you already have the relationship established when you get to that next level.
Mm.
So I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, it's quite universal, isn't it? Because it's not just for product people, really. It's anticipating what your next move is and saying, okay, what does that position do, which mine necessarily doesn't have the accountability for or responsibility for, and yeah, going out the way to you know either learn those skills ahead of being promoted or to be able to show that you potentially could do it to your bosses and open up that option for them without treading on too many toes, I guess, at, at the same time, and being wary of other people. in the organization and not kind of overpowering them.
Right. Yeah. It has to be done with care. A lot of times it's around knowledge sharing. Um, and a lot of times it can really help in your current role to take on a few challenges at the next level. And I, I I've caught myself several times, like I get feedback from my boss, like, well, you should have talked about this on that presentation to the senior leader. And I go defensive like all of us. And I said, I felt like saying, well, you should have introduced me to more people at that level and then I'd know them better. Well, my boss doesn't have time for that.
Hmm.
He's got his own thing to do. So I should find ways to engage with those people. And it gives back because while it is scary to reach up to a peer of your boss or a peer of your boss's boss to get feedback, it's a very good exercise to think about, what am I doing? How do I make that relevant, that next level? and and then get his feedback. It's going to improve. And that's what a lot of these superpowers is about that extra something that isn't in your job description. By knowing what the more senior people are worried about, it helps you improve as well.
That proactivity and I think also accountability for your own actions. If you have some negative feedback, just own it and say, even if I maybe disagree with some of the things, if that's being observed of me, there's obviously something which I'm projecting out. So how can I fix that? What's on me to do that? Yeah, with some tact as well, I suppose. As you said, it reminds me of a book I read a while ago called "The 48 Laws of Power" by I think Robert Greene. And one of the laws of power to become a powerful person is to not outshine the master. And I think that's where the tact comes in, right? So yeah, do the strategy piece to try and pursue to a senior PM without trying to say your strategy's wrong, mine's right. Here's why. Promote me.
Right. It take in the feedback and adapt it. And you hit on another key thing, which is sometimes we just get wrapped in doing. You know, get to inbox, get your inbox down, do this, and reflection is what helps a lot. Like you were pointing out, Adam, to when when you get feedback, you want to say, no, that's not right. But once you think about it, then you think, oh, there is something I could do about that.
So the very final point then on the superpowers is kind of a combination of skills. You said blending the skills. So is that a blending of everything we talked about? Is it a blending of some? Is it the secret sauce, as I said at the beginning? Is that what is blending the skills and why is it a specific superpower?
Yeah, and it's like what we were talking about. Don't overdo it. Don't don't get so empathetic that you you halt all confrontations, because we do need to drive things forward. So well, they're a superpower more because it helps up your performance, but let them be a blend. And we're all stronger. We all have strengths and weaknesses. So by blending, you can offset some of your weaknesses.
Mm,
So that's that's what I feel like. And we all get experience too. You learn the domain you're in, and some some product teams might value communication a lot more, where another one might want you to be very empathetic
mm.
and the really nice guy. Another one might value technical skills. And then you have to learn and bone up on your technical skills and be able to go hand to hand with the engineering.
Mm. Yeah, really
So,
dependent on the environment. And I think, as with so much in life, balance is a big part of it, right? So you have to not just go all in on one
exactly.
thing, and you have to kind of balance things, compromise, or just bring in certain soft skills at times when you need to bring them in. Yeah, be able to have them in your toolkit. I suppose that's the key thing.
Yeah, and think about the different scenarios and consequences. A lot of times product manager is like the one person that's thinking a few steps ahead because everyone's so strong in their area. There's not anyone that's looking out like, well, what if we skip doing penetration testing? It's not a big deal. We've never found anything. And it's going to be up to the product manager to think about, well, what are the risks? Well, maybe we can skip it, but what are we going to say when the next new customer asks to see the last penetration test and it's 2 years old?
Mm.
That customer might decide they're going to go to the competition. So it's about thinking ahead sometimes and communicating about it well. It's a thinking
Yeah.
job a lot of times, in my opinion.
Well, the thinking ahead's a nice segue into, I suppose, the last question of the podcast, which is, moving forward, product management. These superpowers sound rather timeless, but what are you thinking about in terms of the future of product management?
When I look back, and I've been a product manager for 20 years, I think about there were things that just seemed like the way we'd always do things, and now they've changed. Like waterfall versus agile was a change for us. So when I look ahead with that sort of background, one thing I'm seeing is more and more product managers needs to have general management skills. You can't just be a tech giant. Likewise, you can't be a marketing giant. You can't go out and do road shows to customers and be a product manager anymore. You have to have kind of like the whole package of a great combination of technology and financial. And that's where some of these superpowers do come in, because if you're building relationships and you're thinking about relationships a couple levels up, that's how you're going to get the help, because no one of us can know everything. But you kind of get put in this role where you almost have to know everything. You have to be able to bring the strengths of a team out, and when you put it together, the team should be stronger than any one individual. So that's one thing I'm seeing, is that we're all getting pushed to know more business, more technical, and the technology is advancing so quick, you have to know that. So that's one thing. The second one that's coming out a lot and hitting me is around ethics. When you have these thorny questions, it usually lands on the product manager's desk because it doesn't fall neatly into any one camp. Um, Security and data privacy are the ones that hit the most on me.
Right.
And that's a lot of thinking, action, and thinking about scenarios, patterns, what will happen in the future. And the other side of the ethics is around business practices. And we all have to like review our code of business conduct, and this is even making its way into contracts when you deal with somebody on the outside. But there's a lot of nuances there, around competitive plays, fair treatment, um, that a lot of times the product manager's the only person that can think about that. And you need to talk to legal and procurement and marketing and look at it all
Mm.
together holistically.
Yeah, I guess AI complicates things as well because there's a whole wave of
Yeah.
ethics, as AI gets more integrated into our products and processes.
Yeah, and AI is the other big trend that's gonna make a difference. Besides the ethics, the ethics is huge. Like, where's training data coming from? How is training data being validated? That's coming into the ethics side as well. But when we think a few steps ahead, as we see like these no code tools, we're gonna our engineering teams are gonna become fast, and our whole role has always been based on letting engineers take their time, do quality regression testing, all of this stuff. We're going to have to rethink what we do in product management when engineers, or maybe even one engineer, maybe even a product manager, can create a product.
Mm.
um, how much faster can we get the word out on the marketing? How fast can we write requirements so that they are hitting the target in terms of the requirements? So I think that's one thing AI is going to make us all think about. And of course, as product managers, we're all experimenting with AI. It's helping all of us tremendously in the front, but a lot of times in the back
Mm.
on getting good requirements straight out of Copilot or Chat GPT. But we still have the risk management part of things, which I think in the future, we're going to have AI is going to be helping us with that. And when we have to think about the risk management, we have to think of so many different things like penetration tests on security, data privacy, and physical security. And I think AI is going to eventually start helping us so that maybe I'll get an email from, say, some AI and be saying, "Did you check this?" Or there's a new regulatory thing that I think might affect you.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, maybe get a
so
wave of
it's a lot.
a wave
Yeah.
of AI-based ethical hackers maybe coming. Not real people, but just the AI. Yeah, many things to think about, and a number of those points we could spin into an entire episode of their own. But
Yes.
yeah, any final thoughts you'd like to leave people with?
Well, I think that it's continuous learning. And part of the reason why I write the newsletter is it there is so much to learn. And if you'd asked me 20 years ago, when do you think you'll have this product management role accomplished? And I'd probably say, oh, not too long. But I find it's constantly evolving, besides the technology evolving, but our role continuously changes. Where a few years ago it was like, go be technical or DevOps. And now we're looking at different things where a blend of business and technical is more needed. So that being my main point is keep learning and ask questions and talk to other people, just like we're talking now. I've learned already a lot from you on this call. So I think learning's important.
Yeah, well, it's why I started the podcast, really, just to learn for myself and hopefully share some of those insights with other people as well who want to kind of join me on that journey. So, Amy, it's been
Yeah.
fascinating, and I really appreciate your time. Where can people find you online in your newsletter and so on?
Thanks. It's called Product Management IRL, or in the real life, and it's amycmitchell.substack.com. Also on LinkedIn, I'm active on LinkedIn. I'd love to have more people connect to me, and it's Amy Mitchell. Uh, and also, I'm at Dell. I'm the only Amy Mitchell at Dell Technologies. So I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn, or uh, join the Substack and get a free article every week.
Good stuff. Well, I'll put notes. We have links in the show notes below and on description on YouTube as well, so people can click through from there. So thanks a lot, Amy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Speak
Adam.
soon.
Thanks. It's been fun.
You've been watching or listening to the Product Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to share with your colleagues and subscribe on YouTube. It really helps grow to the channel into the future. I'll see you in the next episode.